Wake of the Bellerophon by T.B. Dahl. Chapter 9. The First Duties and Dinner. The next morning did not arrive gently. It cut through the midshipman's berth on the edge of a boatswain's call, sharp enough to shave sleep from bone. Thomas Oxenham came out of his hammock badly. One moment he lay curled in canvas, dreaming of the pond at Newton Ferrers and William's voice calling from the reeds. The next he was half upside down, one knee hooked over the hammock's edge, one hand clutching air, while the ship groaned beneath him and someone shouted that the anchor would not weigh itself. Ships, Thomas was beginning to understand, expected participation. "Up you go, Oxenham," Farley called, already dressed and rolling his hammock into a neat bundle. Captain's ordered anchor weighed with the morning tide. Thomas dropped to the deck with more noise than dignity. Dignity, like fresh bread, was already proving difficult to keep aboard. Around him the berth moved with practised urgency. Hammocks came down, blankets were rolled, chests opened and shut. Boys and young men dressed in confined space with elbows, curses, and the alarming efficiency of those accustomed to sharing air with 12 other tempers. Thomas pulled on his clothes by lamplight. Buttons resisted him. His shirt twisted. One stocking bunched inside his shoe. The deck shifted under his feet, not greatly, but enough to remind him that the floor had resigned from stability. Milford's voice cracked across the berth. "Fall in for inspection." The midshipmen arranged themselves in a line that would have satisfied no parade ground, but evidently satisfied the Navy, which had larger things to worry about. Milford's eyes moved over them. He stopped at Thomas. "Good God, Oxenham." Thomas looked down at himself. Milford continued, "Oh, you look as though you were dragged backwards through a hawse hole and then dressed by the cook's assistant during an earthquake. Tuck in your shirt." Thomas obeyed. Several boys smiled into their collars. Farley caught his eye and gave the smallest shrug. This was not cruelty. This was weather. Heavy footfalls sounded above. Voices rose. The ship was waking fully now. Men moved to stations. Blocks began to rattle. Somewhere forward, a capstan bar struck wood with a hollow knock. The morning had the tense, crowded feel of a thing about to move. Lieutenant Ballard appeared at the entrance to the berth. Every back straightened. "Mr. Oxenham?" "Yes, sir." "Your uniform has arrived. It came aboard with the last of the supplies, which is fortunate for your appearance, and unfortunate for the tailor's schedule." Relief went through Thomas so quickly that his knees nearly softened. "Thank you, sir. The bundle is below your berth. Dress properly and report to the quarter-deck." "Yes, sir." Ballard looked once at Milford. "Do not eat him before breakfast, Mr. Milford. We have uses for him yet." Milford inclined his head. "I shall preserve him, sir." Ballard left. Thomas found the parcel beside his chest. For a moment he only looked at it. Then he cut the cord and unfolded the blue coat with white facings. It was stiff. New cloth always seemed convinced of its own importance. The brass buttons gleamed in the berth's yellow lamplight. The seams smelled of wool, dye, packing paper, and land. Thomas put it on carefully, one arm, then the other. The shoulders sat slightly broad. Anne had allowed for growth. Of course she had. His mother was still commanding from miles away through tailoring. Farley stepped back and inspected him. "Well?" Thomas waited. Farley said, "You almost look the part. That is encouragement. On Bellerophon. It is practically a poem." Thomas fastened the last button. The coat's weight settled across his shoulders. It did not make him an officer. It did not make him competent. It did, however, make him stand straighter. Clothes are foolish things until suddenly they are not. They climbed to the upper deck just as Captain Hope gave the order to weigh. The morning air struck Thomas clean in the face, cold and salt and full of movement. Plymouth lay around them in pale early light. Masts, roofs, smoke, water, gulls, small craft, dockyard cranes, and men already at labour because ports sleep poorly in wartime. Belleropfon's deck swarmed. Sailors manned the capstan, their bodies leaning into the bars in a slow, circular labor. The capstan pulls clacked steadily. Around and around they walked, boots thudding, shoulders set, breath steaming. The messenger cable surged, orders passed forward. Boys darted between stations with messages, coils, pins, and the serious faces of children entrusted with adult inconvenience. A fiddle struck up near the capstan. Thomas stared. Farley leaned close. Helps them keep step. The tune was merry. The work was brutal. This, Thomas decided, was the Navy in miniature. From the forecastle came the cry, "She's away, sir!" Captain Hope stood on the quarterdeck, hat low, gaze forward. "Very good. Make sail." The order ran through the ship like flame along powder. Hands sprang to braces. Men swarmed up the ratlines, rising into the rigging with a speed that made Thomas's stomach tighten. They climbed outward along the yards, small dark figures against the paling sky. Canvas loosened, shook, dropped in great folds. Wind caught it with a crack. The topsails filled first, then the courses, then the ship altered beneath Thomas's feet. Not a roll now, not anchor movement, a living pull. Bellerophon gathered herself and began to move. The deck leaned by a whisper. Water hissed along her side. The anchor catted, the sails drawing, the helm alive. The great ship easing away from Plymouth, as though the harbour itself had decided to release a weapon. Thomas turned, despite himself, towards shore. There, on the dock, among carts, sailors, barrels, and a confusion of hats, stood William Rowe. He was waving both arms. Thomas's chest tightened. William had no business being visible at that distance, yet Thomas knew him at once. The square set of him, the forge-broad shoulders, the cap lifted in one hand. Beside him stood Mr. Jenkins, arms folded, looking as if he had come to inspect the ironwork and found human feelings obstructing the view. Thomas lifted his hand. For 3 heartbeats, boy on ship and boy on shore held the same line of sight across widening water. Then Lieutenant Ballard's voice came beside him. "Eyes forward, Mr. Oxenham." Thomas lowered his hand. "Yes, sir." Ballard's tone was not unkind. "Your duty is to the ship now." Thomas faced forward. The words settled more heavily than the coat. Bellerophon passed through the busy water of the Sound under easy sail. Plymouth fell astern by degrees, refusing at first to become small, then doing so all at once. Mewstone stood grey against the sea. The wind freshened. The ship answered. Farley was assigned to conduct Thomas through the ship, and did so with brisk competence, magnifice, and a private amusement at Thomas's expression. "This is the upper deck," Farley said. "Quarterdeck aft, sacred to officers' duty and silence when one is unsure what to say. Forecastle forward, where anchor work, sail handling, and much shouting occurs. You may go where duty takes you. Do not wander where curiosity takes you unless curiosity has written permission." They descended. "Gun deck," Farley said. The great guns stood in their rows, secured for sea, iron dark and polished by use. Men moved among them, lashing, checking tackle, securing gear. A ship of the line at sea did not tidy herself because she was vain. She tidied herself because anything loose became a missile when weather turned. "These are the beauties that make us what we are," Farley said. Thomas looked down the long line of black muzzles, 32-pounders, lower deck, 18-pounders above, 9-pounders on quarterdeck and forecastle. Carronades too, though ratings pretend not to count them because ratings are made by gentlemen with tables rather than enemies with hulls. Thomas touched the cool barrel of one gun. Each crew, 6 men and a powder boy more or less, gun captain commands. In action, everything must move like one creature. Sponge, load, run out, fire, run in. Again, again, again. Until the enemy strikes, we strike. The ship sinks, or someone important changes his mind. The casual manner did not conceal the meaning. Thomas withdrew his hand. Farley led him lower. Berth deck. Men sling hammocks here between the guns and beams. Do not step on a man's kit. Do not step on a man. The second offence is sometimes forgiven more easily than the first. They went down again to the orlop. The air thickened, the light dimmed. The hold below carries water casks, provisions, stores, shot, spare cordage, and enough rats to form a parish. Farley led him aft to a grim compartment. The cockpit. His voice changed. Thomas peered in. Table stood ready, scrubbed hard, stained anyway. Shelves held instruments that looked too deliberate to be tools and too clean to be weapons. Saws, knives, probes, forceps, bullet extractors, needles, tourniquets. A lantern swung slightly overhead. The space smelled of vinegar, old wood, stale blood that scrubbing had not entirely persuaded away, and the cold expectation of men who might be brought there screaming. The surgeon works here during action, Farley said. Surgeon and mates. Powder monkeys bring the wounded down if they can walk. If they cannot, others carry them. They call it the slaughterhouse. Thomas looked at the tables. He saw, without wanting to, the other end of his morning lessons. Not gun drill, but consequence. Farley glanced at him. Best not to stare too long. The cockpit enjoys being remembered. They moved on. At the ship's head, Farley showed him the seats of ease, a row of necessary openings at the bow, exposed to air, spray, shipmates, and philosophy. Officers have arrangements aft, Farley said. Midshipmen use these with the crew. Thomas looked at them. Farley grinned. You get used to it. I'm told that often. It is often true. Face forward when seated. Thomas looked at him. Why? Bad form to show your backside to the ship. Thomas considered asking whether the ship minded. He decided not to. The tour ended as the land had fallen farther away. Bellerophon stood eastward, bound for Spithead, rolling gently on the channel swell. Thomas found that his legs adjusted if he stopped expecting the deck to apologize. The ship's motion was not random. It had rhythm. He could feel it through the soles of his new oversized shoes. 8 bells sounded. Dinner, Farley said. Brace yourself. The Navy believes food should sustain life, but not vanity. The midshipmen's mess was already crowded when they arrived. The berth table had been laid in the manner of a battlefield after the generals had lost interest. A dozen young men pressed around it, arguing, laughing, reaching, making space by taking it from others. Thomas sat on his sea chest, where Farley directed him. Perkins, the berth steward, appeared with a dish of salt beef. Perkins was an older sailor with one shoulder higher than the other, a nose broken long ago and accepted without correction, and a manner of serving young gentlemen that suggested he had seen them born, promoted, flogged, seasick, drunk, glorious, and ridiculous in no particular order. He set the dish down. Salt beef followed. Peas pudding, ship's biscuit, cabbage and turnips grey enough to have lost ambition. Dig in, lads, Milford said, carving himself a portion, and leave something for Mr. Oxenham. He must build strength for climbing, hauling, vomiting, and pretending not to. Food moved with astonishing speed. Thomas watched before taking. There were rules here too. Unwritten. Who carved first? Who reached after whom? How much was greed? How little looked weak? When the beef came, Thomas cut a modest slice. A red-haired midshipman beside him, Clark, said, "Smaller." Thomas looked at him. "We are only 2 days out of port," Clark said. "The beef gets worse. Begin light and preserve hope." Thomas reduced the portion. The ship's biscuit felt like masonry. Farley said, "Tap it." Thomas tapped it on the table. 2 small weevils emerged, offended by eviction. Thomas froze. Morris, across from him, said, "Well, those are the polite ones. They leave when asked." The table laughed. Thomas looked at Farley. Farley took his own biscuit, tapped it, inspected the result, and bit in. "Protein," he said. Thomas was hungry enough to accept naval reasoning. Conversation swept around him. A French privateer chased off Ushant, a storm in the Bay of Biscay that had taken a topgallant mast and one man's wig, though no one admitted owning the wig, a Portsmouth tavern where a marine had proposed marriage to twins and been refused by both for separate theological reasons, a lieutenant on another ship who mistook a pig for a powder monkey in bad light and nearly ordered it flogged for slowness. The berth received this last item with solemn appreciation. "So, Oxenham," said Harris, a lanky midshipman with restless hands, "your father is a post-captain?" The table's attention turned toward Thomas. "Yes, Captain James Oxenham." "Toulon?" Milford asked. "He was there." "A good action," Milford said. The words were casual, but the interest was real. "He must have influence to get you aboard Billy Ruffian for your first berth." Thomas blinked. "Billy Ruffian?" Laughter rolled around the table. Farley explained, "The old salt's name for Bellerophon, easier to say with half one's teeth gone." Clark added, "And harder for landsmen to spell." Milford watched Thomas over his cup. "So, which admiral does your family know?" "No admiral." "None?" "No." "Then Hope took you from pure charity?" Thomas felt the old heat rise. He put down his cup carefully. "My father taught me navigation. Captain Hammond saw my work. Captain Hope found it satisfactory." Milford's brows lifted. "Found it satisfactory?" There was enough mockery in the repetition to bite a louder answer. Thomas did not give one. "My father says usefulness is better than display," Thomas said. Farley looked into his cup. Clark coughed into his sleeve. Milford held Thomas's gaze for a moment, then smiled thinly. "We shall see whether the ship agrees." The talk shifted. Thomas ate in silence and listened. The berth had currents like the Yelm. Milford held the centre by seniority and cleverness. Villiers orbited him with bitterness. Phillips and Grant, two stocky older boys with hard faces, laughed half a breath. After Milford, which was the timing of followers everywhere. Farley belonged to everyone and no one. Clark amused himself. Morris ate. Walton and Devereux, older and steadier, spoke less and watched more. After the meal, those two approached Thomas. Walton was tall and brown-haired, with a scar through one eyebrow. Devereux was broader, quieter, and had the calm of someone who had already been frightened enough to stop performing courage. "James Walton," said the taller one, offering a hand. "This is Edward Devereux. We came aboard 3 years ago." Thomas shook their hands. "Thomas Oxenham. First time at sea?" "On a warship, yes. Small boat since I was 6? "That is something," Devereux said. "Better than coming aboard full of Latin and no balance." Thomas thought of Reverend Makepeace. "I have some Latin as well." "Then hide it until needed," Walton advised. Devereux lowered his voice. "Most are decent enough. Milford can be hard, but he respects competence eventually. Phillips and Grant are different. They enjoy a new boy because he is new, not because he has done anything." Thomas glanced toward them. Phillips and Grant were whispering over a cup, shoulders together, faces bright with some private malice. "Stay near Farley for a bit," Walton said, "and lock your chest." "I was told that already." "Good. Be told twice." The afternoon brought Thomas's first watch on the quarterdeck under Ballard. The wind had freshened. Bellerophon leaned to it, cutting through the channel with her wake drawn out white and long behind. Sail bellies swelled above. Blocks creaked. The helm moved under the quartermaster's hands. The master checked course. Officers watched everything without appearing to watch any one thing. Ballard stood beside Thomas near the weather rail. "Your duty on watch is to observe and learn. If given an order, repeat it clearly before carrying it. If you do not understand, ask once, quickly. Better one honest question than one fatal invention. Yes, sir. Study the set of sail. Watch the helm. Learn how orders pass. A captain's intention is useless unless it becomes action in the right hands at the right moment. Thomas followed his gaze. Captain Hope stood aft, speaking briefly to the master. The master gave an order. The quartermaster adjusted the helm. A lieutenant called forward. A boatswain's mate piped. Men sprang to braces. A sail trimmed by inches. The ship responded. It was like watching thought become rope, rope become canvas, canvas become motion. When not directly engaged, Ballard gave Thomas knots to practice. Bowline, clove hitch, reef knot, sheet bend, rolling hitch. Thomas's fingers moved carefully. Some knots obeyed, others became small disgraces. Ballard corrected without drama. Again. Thomas did it again. When the watch ended, his hands were cold and his head full. Back in the berth, several midshipmen gathered around a makeshift lesson. Milford stood with chalk and slate, drawing a track, wind arrow, and notations. Navigation study, Farley murmured. Senior mids, tutor juniors. The captain expects all of us to know where we are, or at least to lie intelligently while finding out. Thomas sat at the edge. Milford explained dead reckoning. Course steered, speed by log, time, leeway, current if known, guesswork if not, and the humility to admit that a chart was not the sea but only an argument about it. To Thomas's surprise, much was familiar. James's evening lessons returned. The Lizard to Ushant, leeway off a weather shore, set of tide, correcting for error. Milford posed a problem. A ship steering east by south, making 7 knots for 4 hours, then east-northeast for 6, leeway estimated at 1 point, current setting southwest, last known position given. The berth went quiet. Several boys bent over slates. Thomas saw the track in his head before his hand finished writing. No one answered. Thomas said, latitude about 49 degrees, 12 minutes north, longitude 5 degrees, 8 minutes west. Milford looked up. About? Depending on how much the current strengthened after the second change of course. Milford checked his figures, then checked them again. That is correct. Villiers muttered something. Milford ignored him. Perhaps Captain Oxenham's lessons were not entirely ornamental. Thomas lowered his eyes to his slate. It was praise, though bruised in delivery. He accepted it. Later, as Bellerophon approached shallower waters near the Isle of Wight, Thomas was sent to assist the master's mate with the lead line. The task steadied him. He knew this rhythm. Swing, let fly, line hiss, lead strikes, read the mark, call depth. By the mark, 5. The cry left his mouth and vanished forward in the wind. Again, the lead arced, dropped, vanished. The channel water took it. Deep 6. The master's mate watched him. Handled a lead before? Yes. Good. Do not get clever with it. Depth is one of those facts the seabed refuses to negotiate. Evening came grey-blue over the channel. Bellerophon shortened sail for the night passage towards Spithead. The bustle changed pitch. Men moved with urgency, but not panic. Lanterns appeared. The sea darkened. The ship's wake shone faintly astern. Supper in the berth was salt pork, biscuit, and vegetables that had surrendered all political identity. Thomas ate because he was hungry. Around him, conversation turned to Portsmouth and possible shore leave. Taverns were named, dance halls discussed, debts remembered, fights embellished. Milford cut across the rising hopes. Do not dream too richly, gentlemen. Word is we join the Channel Fleet as soon as we reach Spithead. Admiral Howe is gathering ships. The berth stirred. What for? Asked Wilson, a younger midshipman with anxious eyes. Farley said, Word below is a French convoy. Grain from America bound for Brest. The Republic is starving, Walton added. Then we shall make it hungrier, Milford said. No one laughed much. Thomas looked around the table. The words changed the room. Convoy? Brest? How? French fleet. Not exercises now. Not stories. Not diagrams. Milford leaned back. If Howe brings their escort to action, it may be the biggest fight since the Somme. Thomas felt the thrill first, then the drop beneath it. A battle. His first voyage, his first watch, his first dinner aboard, not yet digested properly, and somewhere ahead, perhaps, enemy ships, gun smoke, splinters, blood, command, courage, terror, all the things boys imagined and fathers remembered too well to describe fully. He reached for his cup. His hand was steady. He was pleased by that and ashamed of being pleased. After supper the berth quieted by degrees. Some wrote letters, some studied, some played cards for small stakes. Perkins collected dishes with the resignation of a man who had long ago concluded that young gentlemen produced more mess than strategic value. Thomas sat on his sea chest and opened the logbook James had given him. He dipped his pen. The ship rolled slightly. The first line came crooked. He began again. Below it, HMS Bellerophon. First day under sail. Weighed anchor from Plymouth with the morning tide. Wind fair. Made sail for Spithead. Saw William on the dock. Ordered eyes forward by Lieutenant Ballard. Ship's company active and efficient. Midshipman's berth crowded. Food tolerable if approached as duty. Assisted with a lead line near evening. Rumour of French grain convoy and Admiral Howe's fleet. He paused, then added, must learn quickly. He sanded the ink and closed the book. Farley noticed his eyelids drooping. Best sleep while you can. You're on morning watch. 4 to 8. Ballard will expect you sharp. Thomas nodded. He rigged his hammock with less assistance this time. Not well, perhaps, but less badly. Progress at sea often came disguised as reduced incompetence. He climbed in. The hammock took his weight. It swung. He adjusted. Around him the berth murmured. Above, the ship creaked. Outside the hull, the channel ran dark beneath them. Thomas closed his eyes. The day circled inside him. William waving from shore, the capstan turning, sails snapping open, Bellerophon moving under him, guns in rows. The cockpit stained tables, Weevils leaving biscuit, Milford's narrow stare, Ballard's voice, the lead line wet in his hands, the rumour of a French convoy crossing the sea with grain enough to feed a starving republic and perhaps draw fleets into battle. Home did not vanish. It remained behind his ribs. But another thing had begun to take shape beside it. Purpose. Not the shining sort from books. Something harder, saltier, and less polite. Thomas Oxenham, midshipman of HMS Bellerophon, surrendered at last to sleep, while the ship rolled eastward through the night. Above him canvas held the wind. Below him the sea kept its counsel. Ahead, beyond Spithead and beyond rumour, the war was moving too.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.